The signs had always been there, but I chose to ignore them. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the way she responded, brief and distant, excuses that felt hollow. The way her gaze flickered away whenever I asked how she was. Then came the nights she claimed exhaustion, the calls she silenced when I was near, the messages she answered with a faint, secretive smile when she thought I wasn't watching. Of course, I noticed, but I stayed silent, convincing myself it was just stress, that maybe routine had worn us thin. I told myself if I waited long enough, things would return to how they once were. Until one evening, as we ate in near silence, I set my fork down and met her eyes. "Tell me what's going on, Carolina." She didn't flinch. There was no attempt to feign surprise. Her eyes drifted from her plate to mine, then to the wine swirling in her glass. She took her time, as if carefully crafting her next words. But when she finally spoke, her voice was razor-sharp, cool, and deliberate. "I need space." The room fell into stillness, save for the ticking clock on the wall and the distant hum of traffic outside. I nodded slowly. I didn't ask why. I didn't beg. If space was what she needed, she could have it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. That space had a name, a first and a last. And soon enough, I'd confirm it. I didn't have to wait long. A few days later, while Carolina was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I'm not the kind of man who checks his partner's phone. I never have been. But that night, fate delivered the truth straight into my hands. A single name flashed on the screen: Rodrigo. No surname. No emojis. Just Rodrigo. The phone buzzed again. Without thinking, I picked it up and swiped the screen. "Hey, love. See you tomorrow." No pretense. No elaborate lies. Just another rendezvous in her carefully orchestrated betrayal. I inhaled sharply, my pulse steady. Then, for the first time, I did what I had avoided for weeks. I opened their messages. What I found made my stomach turn. Explicit photos. Words dripping with things I never imagined coming from her. This wasn't the woman I had married. I stared at the screen for a moment, as if giving my brain time to process it. Then, without a word, I set the phone back exactly where it was and walked toward the bathroom. The water was still running. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her silhouette shift behind the fog glass. There she was, my wife, the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, completely unaware that her carefully kept world was seconds from collapse. I stepped away without making a sound and poured myself a drink. That would be the last time I ever questioned her. That night, when Carolina emerged from the bathroom, I saw her with new eyes. Once, I had looked at her with love, desire, and the quiet comfort that comes with knowing someone inside and out. Now, all I saw was a stranger. She sat on the bed, towel drying her hair, then glanced at me, sensing the shift in the air. "What's wrong?" she asked, hesitation creeping into her voice. I smiled, but not the way I once did. This wasn't warmth. It wasn't affection. It was the smile of a man who had peered into the abyss and stepped forward without fear. "Nothing at all," I said, holding her gaze with a calmness that even surprised me. I watched as tension rippled through her body, her hands pausing mid-motion. She had expected something else: rage, accusations, a scene she could twist into victimhood. But I gave her nothing, only silence. I reached for the lamp on my side of the bed, turned it off and rolled over, presenting her with my back. And in that moment, she began to realize this space she had asked for was not the kind she had imagined. Silence is a powerful weapon. I had learned that over the past few days. And now, Carolina was learning it too. She watched me cautiously, waiting for an outburst, for a confrontation, for me to demand answers. But I never did, and that terrified her more than any fury ever could. As for me, my decision had already been made early one morning. While she was still asleep, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Ernesto Martinez. He had been a close friend of the family for years, pragmatic, sharp, and never one for unnecessary pleasantries. We met in his office, a modest yet sophisticated space in the heart of downtown. "I need to start the divorce process," I said, skipping any preamble. Ernesto leaned back slightly, folding his hands on the desk. "Reasons?" I drew in a slow breath, considering all the things I could say. I could mention Carolina's growing distance, her betrayal, how she had reduced me to nothing more than a shadow in her life. But in the end, I kept it simple. There's no love left. And without love, there's no point. Ernesto studied me for a moment before giving a slow nod. "Have you spoken to her about this?" "No. But once she sees the papers, she'll understand." Without another word, he picked up a pen and began making notes. "Shared assets, joint accounts, everything is in my name," I replied. "The house, the car, even the bank account. I just want this done quickly. No disputes, no drawn-out battles." A smirk played at the corner of his lips. "That's what everyone says at first. But once she sees the papers, she might feel differently." I knew Ernesto was right. Carolina wasn't the kind of woman to lose without trying to twist things in her favor. But I no longer cared. "Just send me the documents when they're ready," I said, rising from my chair. As I stepped out of his office, an unexpected sense of relief settled over me. No anger, no regret, just the quiet certainty that I was doing the right thing. When I got home, Carolina was already awake, sitting in the living room with the television on, though her eyes weren't really on the screen. She glanced at me, hesitation flickering in her gaze. "Where were you?" It was the first time in weeks she had shown any interest in my whereabouts. I shrugged. "Making decisions?" Her brow furrowed, but she didn't press further. I walked past her, straight to our bedroom, and pulled a suitcase from the closet. I didn't take everything, just what I needed. I had no intention of staying a moment longer than necessary. 2 days later, the envelope arrived. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of everything it represented. This wasn't just legal paperwork. It was a final stroke that would sever our bond. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I pushed the envelope toward her. She blinked confused. "What's this?" Leaning back in my chair, I met her eyes with calm detachment. "You said you needed space. I'm giving it to you." Carolina hesitated before picking up the envelope, her fingers trembling as if she were holding something volatile. Carefully, she opened it and pulled out the papers. As she read, I watched the shift in her expression. "Julian," her voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't," I cut in before she could string together an explanation. "Save whatever you have to say for your lawyer. You'll need one." She lifted her gaze to mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My decision was final. She sat frozen, staring at the papers as if they belonged to someone else's life, as if rereading them might change the reality they held. I saw her mouth open a few times, but no words came out. For once, Carolina was speechless. The confidence she had when she first asked for space was gone. So was the indifference she had worn like armor, assuming I would always be there, no matter what. "Julian," she tried again, her voice breaking slightly. I crossed my arms, my tone as cold as the one she had used on me for months. "Something to say?" Her eyes met mine, and I saw the exact moment it hit her. This wasn't just an argument. This wasn't something she could undo. "It doesn't have to end like this," she murmured. "We can talk." I let out a short, dry laugh. "Talk," I repeated, shaking my head. "When I tried to, you asked for space. Well, here it is." Her hand slackened, and the papers slipped onto the table. She leaned forward slightly, her expression different now. If she had looked at me like that sooner, maybe, just maybe, I would have hesitated. "Julian, please." "No," I said firmly, standing from my chair. No more pleases. No more trying to fix what you destroyed. I strode to the entryway, where my suitcase sat waiting. Lifting it, I turned to face her one last time. I'm going to Ernesto's office to sign everything. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She shot up from her chair, the panic on her face deepening. But what if we try again? That was the last thing she ever said to me as my wife. I exhaled slowly and met her desperate gaze with unwavering finality. You should have thought of that before you cheated on me. Her eyes widened, her face drained of color. It was the first time it had occurred to her that I might have known all along. Before she could stammer out some excuse, I turned, opened the door, and stepped out. I didn't look back. The silence she had once asked for, demanded even, was now all she had left.